Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 18, verse 39. Sava Angiraso Brahman Srutva Sutta Vilapanam Unmilya Shanakanetre Drishva Shamse Metoragam. So, he, also Angirasa, Rishi born in the family of Angira. Brahman, O Shaunaka, Shrutva, on hearing, Sutta, his son, Vilapanam, crying in distress, Unmilya, opening, Shanakai, gradually, Netre, by the eyes, Drishva, by seeing, also Amse, on the shoulder, Amrita, dead, Uragam, snake. Translation: O Brahmana, the Rishi who was born in the family of Angira Muni, hearing his son crying, gradually opened his eyes and saw the dead snake around his neck. Text 40. Translation: He threw the dead snake aside and asked his son why he was crying, whether anyone had done him harm. On hearing this, the son explained to him what had happened. Purport: the father did not take the dead snake on his neck very seriously, simply threw it away. Actually, there was nothing seriously wrong in Maharaj Parikshit's act, but the foolish son took it very seriously, and being influenced by Kali, he cursed the king and thus ended a chapter of happy history. I'll read the next text also. The father heard from his son that the king had been cursed, although he should never have been condemned, for he was the best among all human beings. The Rishi did not congratulate his son, but on the contrary began to repent, saying, Alas, what a great sinful act has been performed by my son. He has awarded heavy punishment for an insignificant offense. Purport: the king is the best of all human beings. He is a representative of God, and he is never to be condemned for any of his actions. In other words, the king can do no wrong. The king may order hanging of a culprit son of a Brahmana, but he does not become sinful for killing a Brahmana. Even if there is something wrong with the king, he is never to be condemned. A medical practitioner may kill a patient by mistaken treatment, but such a killer is never condemned to death. So what to speak of a good and pious king like Maharaj Parikshit? In the Vedic way of life, the king is trained to become a Rajarshi, or a great saint, although he is ruling as king. It is the king only by whose good government the citizens can live peacefully and without any fear. The Rajarsis would manage their kingdom so nicely and piously that their subjects should respect them as if they were the Lord. That is the instruction of the Vedas. The king is called Narendra, or the best among human beings. How then could a king like Maharaj Parikshit be condemned by an inexperienced, puffed-up son of a Brahmana, even though he had attained the powers of a qualified Brahmana? Since Samika Rishi was an experienced good Brahmana, he did not approve of the actions of his condemned son. He began to lament for all his son had done. The king was beyond the jurisdiction of curses as a general rule, and what to speak of a good king like Maharaj Parikshit. The offense of the king was most insignificant, and his being condemned to death was certainly a very great sin for Shringi. Therefore, Rishi Samiki regretted the whole incident. Translation, the father heard from his son that the king had been cursed, although he should never have been condemned, for he was the best among all human beings. The rishi did not congratulate his son, but rather, on the contrary, began to repent, saying, "Alas, what a great sinful act was performed by my son. He has awarded heavy punishment. He has awarded heavy punishment for an insignificant offense." So, here we see the response of the sage. He was the person who had been apparently offended by Parikshit, and it was Shringi who took it upon himself to pass a judgment about the seriousness of the crime, and therefore he cursed the king. The father came back to consciousness from his trance of meditation, and he saw the snake, and he brushed it aside, and he didn't think anything of it. But then he saw his son crying, and then he asked the son, and the son said, "Well, I made a mistake because I cursed this king," because he put a snake around your neck. And so then the father, we see here, actually regrets the act of his son, and he also criticizes his son and scolds his son for doing that particular act. And he scolds him because the punishment was not in accordance with the so-called crime. In other words, the father didn't consider putting the snake around his neck worthy of being cursed to death. So therefore he found his son had acted very indiscriminately and did this act which was greatly unfortunate. And the father himself also realizes the great position of King Parikshit. So, and from this we also see that the father was highly qualified. So we have a qualified father and an unqualified son passing a curse on Parikshit Maharaj. And as we see here, the son had cursed, and he was not so qualified, but he had gained enough powers to implement a curse. So he got some powers from his father, but he did not have the discretion to learn how to use them properly. And therefore the son gets condemned not only by history itself, but by his own father. And the reason for this, of course, is the severity of the punishment, and particularly because Parikshit Maharaj was the person who got condemned. So on one hand, it is very tragic, but as Prabhupada has already explained, this was also an arrangement of the Supreme Lord so that a Bhagavatam could be written. We see the response of Parikshit also was ideal because he did not regret the curse. He did not want to interfere with that curse, since the son of the Brahmana had made the curse, and even though it was not a proper curse, still he accepted it, and he took it as his good fortune, more or less. And of course then later on, because he got to hear the Bhagavatam from Sukadeva Goswami, then he got a very great reward for his wonderful character. So we can say this whole incident is some sort of arrangement of the Supreme Lord, but we do learn several lessons through this. One, of course, is that we could not take birth as our qualification. In the case here, it's the Brahmana who was proud of his particular birth and getting insulted, or at least his father getting insulted, and therefore using his powers against Parikshit Maharaj. And we see how Shringi considered the Kshatriyas to be inferior to the Brahmanas, and therefore they can be treated in a very bad way. And we saw how he insulted him by saying he's like a dog. The king is like a dog in the house. The Brahmanas are the masters, and the Kshatriyas are like the dogs who take care of the house. They're the watchdog. And they don't deserve to come in the house at all. So he had developed a very disrespectful attitude towards the Kshatriyas and Parikshit Maharaj. So we see here that this was not the attitude of his own father. His father was quite qualified, and he also respected the king. And he considered the act as nothing in particular, nothing so wrong with it. Though it is a normal breach of etiquette, he didn't consider it in the same way that his son did. So why his son felt like this is because he was contaminated. He had this pride. Of course, we can say because he was a little boy, we shouldn't blame him. But nevertheless, this manifested within him, and it created a huge effect. In other words, he made a curse that ended the dynasty, more or less, that Yudhisthira had fought for. It was finished because Parikshit got an early death. His death came very, very early because of that. So very unfortunate in that way. So the son misused his powers because of his pride. Because of his pride, he got anger. And because of the anger, he lost his good sense. And because of losing his good sense, he condemned the king to death, which is very severe. So we can see the influence here of these different factors. Pride leading to anger, leading to loss of discrimination, and leading to terrible acts, which have bad consequences to them. So we cannot only blame the son or the Brahmanas. The same progress appears in all sorts of people. They can develop pride. So it is not necessarily the Brahmana that gets proud. We see Kshatriyas also get proud. And they have plenty of opportunity to do that because it is said that wealth gives rise to pride. And the Kshatriyas have plenty of opportunity for wealth. So therefore it's very likely they'll also become very proud. And once they become proud, then they can fall into this trap, just like Shringi did, and misuse their powers in various ways. And even if they're not Kshatriyas, if they're Vaishyas also, they can be, because they're Vaishyas, they can also become wealthy. And then they can become proud. And then again, they can do all sorts of terrible acts, misuse the good judgment, etc. The Sudra, of course, isn't supposed to own money, so he can't develop wealth to get pride, etc., like that. But the Sudra, according to the Varnashram system, is supposed to serve everybody else. So therefore, there's a restriction on pride developing because he has no money and he's obligated to serve everybody else, and he hasn't got intelligence, so he can work his way up. So automatically he should not have pride. However, we'll see that again. This can happen also. Pride can develop, and particularly in Kali Yuga. So we see the case of this Kali personified. He was a Sudra dressed as a king. So there we see. The Sudra got proud and took over the position of controlling everybody. So pride can pervade the whole Varnashram system, and in that way it gets corrupted. So this can particularly happen in Kali Yuga, of course, because all bad qualities become more prominent and Tamagun becomes more prominent. But it is possible for anyone in any age. So we cannot give Kali Yuga as an excuse to go rampant and display our ignorance and our pride and our anger, etc. It can happen at any time and any place. In this case, it happened with the son of the Brahmana. But we'll see it happen so many other places also, and it's not Kali Yuga. And we'll see it happening among higher personalities as well. And we see that the Kumaras, they got angry and cursed the doorkeepers. So, and we have many cases also of others giving curses, etc. So, this idea of developing pride and that turning into anger and then commission of all sorts of acts is a danger for the human being. For this reason, there are rules, not only in the Varnashram system, but rules for all societies. Even if we go to the most primitive society, they also have rules. And if you break the rules, then you get heavily punished or criticized or ostracized or whatever. So they have the rules because they know that you can't do anything you want. As a member of a group of people, a society, you have to conform to certain standards. So we have rules. So countries also have rules. Why? Because if you don't have rules, people go out of control. They develop attachment, pride, anger, and they do all sorts of crazy acts. So we need rules. So all societies have rules, and they'll differ in different societies. They have different punishments for different things and whatever. And we see, of course, in ancient times, the rules were quite strict or whatever, and if you steal something, your hand's cut off or whatever. Like that. In many societies, it's like that. Still in some societies, I think it's like Saudi Arabia, I think, so you get your hands cut off if you steal. Maybe it's still like that, I don't know. Anyway, in many societies it was like that. Even in medieval Europe, same thing. They would, very harsh punishments for certain crimes that we consider minor at the moment, and they would have very harsh punishments. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. That was, what's his name in Iraq, or that area. They developed the codes, Zoroastrian codes. So you commit a crime, you get an equal punishment back like that. And we see in the Varnashram system also quite some of the punishments are kind of severe. In the Bible also we see harsh punishments given out. Very, very strict rules. And the reason the rules are there is because a human being goes out of control, is liable to go out of control. Which is interesting because the animals don't do that. The animals don't really have rules, so they don't make a constitution. They don't have a country with, you have to do this and this, and they don't train up their kids to follow the rules of society like this. And the reason is, of course, that they don't go out of control so much. Only in very rare cases they start acting irrationally, like where they're put in cages by human beings and put in zoos. Then they may go crazy a little bit, but otherwise in their natural surrounding they don't. They limit themselves, and they don't go to excess. Okay? So we don't see them overeating, for instance. So they don't see them, engaging extravagantly and gratifying their senses. When they got enough, they go away. But human beings go the opposite. They want to get more and more and more, and in pursuit of getting more and more, then they'll commit more violence because they're so greedy. So the Vedas recognize this unfortunate tendency of the human being, and therefore they have this whole set of rules called dharma. As I said, all countries do have, and all civilizations do have rules, but the rules are, quite sophisticated, the rules of dharma, because ultimately they're stemming from the Manus, like Manu Smriti is the rules of dharma, and so many other scriptures are also there for that. And Manu himself is appointed by the Supreme Lord. So therefore the rules of dharma have special significance, they're authorized by the Supreme Lord. So therefore that's why, as Prabhupada mentioned here, it's a scientific process. The scientific values are there in making these rules for certain purposes. So as I said, the whole goal of that system of rules and regulations in Varna Ashram is ultimately to lead into spiritual life, but it's a little bit indirect. So first you start out with basic sense control, etc. But we see it as scientifically arranged in one sense because it has different rules for different people. It's not the same rule for everybody. There are rules for everybody, general rules, but then there's particular restrictions on different groups. So the Sudras have less rules because they're more incapable. The Vaishnavas have a little more rules. Kshatriyas have more rules, and the Brahmanas have the most rules because the Brahmanas are the most capable of following. So according to the quality of the people, they're expected to do more. The higher they go, more rules to follow. So in that sense, we can say scientifically arranged because it doesn't make everybody the equal. They're unequal. They're in different gunas. So therefore, according to the guna, they're given certain rules that they can follow. They may not like to follow, but they should follow, and they're capable of following. So they're given liberal rules on the bottom, and as you go up, you get more strict rules because you're more capable. So according to your ability, you're given more rules. And through that system, it is hoped that through rebirth as a human being, gradually you develop more natural control until you get to the top, where you naturally are not much interested in sense gratification anymore. Then you got all the rules to follow. That's the Brahmana. So the Brahmana is expected to have a higher standard. He's expected to follow all the rules and know the implementation of the rules also. And therefore he's respected by all the other members of society. So that was the system which was set up by Manu and carried on by his descendants. The descendants were these kings. And we see that here it's told previously that this conflict between the Pandavas and Duryodhana and the other, his brothers. And the conflict arose because who is the proper implementer of those rules? Who is more qualified? They came from the same line ultimately. You trace back the genealogy of the Mahabharata and the different kings. Pandu comes here and then they come up and eventually go back. And you can trace both lines ultimately to Vaivasata Manu. That was 28 yuga cycles previously. So that's 4 million times 28 years. It goes back that far from Vaivasata Manu. And then they started the lines, and we get the Sun Dynasty with Rama, and then we get the Moon Dynasty coming out with Krishna in it, and we get the Pandavas coming out, and they all came out eventually from those lines, so in one sense authorized to some degree. But birth is not the only qualification. Okay? The qualities are also necessary. So that's where the Pandavas were chosen by Krishna to rule, not Duryodhana and his brothers, because they rejected the Lord. The Kauravas rejected the Lord, and Pandavas accepted Krishna. So therefore, Krishna said, these are the authorized people. And he supported them, and they came to power. So there were the Pandavas, and Parikshit were the authorized persons to continue to implement those laws so that people were under control properly. If we have the rules, but we have to implement them, make sure they get enforced properly. If the leader himself is not really interested in following the rules or breaks the rules, then how do we expect him to make the other people follow the rules also? He won't do that. He'll let them do whatever they want. If he doesn't consider the rules important, then they won't follow those rules. So the implementation of the rules, knowing the rules and implementing them in the proper way, that is the responsibility of the king. And the king, ultimately, he has, the king, interestingly enough, cannot be Rajagun. He is a mixture of Rajagun because he needs the Rajagun to rule. The Kshatriya has a sense of I. I have to control. It's necessary for him to do that as a Kshatriya. But if he just controls everybody, he'll exploit them. Because that's Rajagun, exploit, enjoyment. So the Kshatriya is not just, doesn't just have Rajagun, he also must have Sattvagun. And because of a Sattvagun nature, he can understand he's not the body. He can understand that the goal of life is not just material, He doesn't get too attached to the material enjoyment. He accepts the scripture, and these are all things that Brahmanas do. Accepting scripture, understanding your Atma, these are Brahmanical things. So he has that much appreciation. And he's willing to follow the advice of the Brahmanas. That's a good Kshatriya. Then the Kshatriya doesn't go out of control and start exploiting everybody. So he has the power, he also has that sattvic nature, so that he implements the rules properly under the direction of the Brahmanas and following scripture. And then things go on nicely. So people get fall under control nicely, and they don't exhibit these bad qualities that we see becoming manifested in the son of Samika Rishi, that is this pride and then anger and then violence, commission of violence, and not with great discrimination or intelligence, is doing things, rashly doing things. So everybody has to be controlled within society so that these tendencies don't create problems for everybody else. If we're by ourselves, it's not such a problem. But then nobody can live by themselves because we're still living in the world, and we're living in a forest or whatever, and there's animals and plants around. So then we'll start affecting all the other animals and plants around us with our violence. So we have to control ourselves, even if we're alone. But what to speak of in society and within family units, we have to control ourselves. Therefore, all of this is there. But ultimately, all of these rules of Dharma are there, but Bhaktivinoda Thakur mentions this. It's very difficult simply to enforce rules. You can enforce rules, but as soon as nobody's looking and they're not, you can break the rule. The nature is to, nobody's looking, you break the rule. So it's an unnatural thing. And that's what we see in society itself. The police are there to enforce the rules. When the police go away, everybody starts breaking the rules. The human tendency is like that. So the rules are good, but then you can't just force the rules on everybody also. So then how do we implement the rules and how do we make the people willing to follow the rules, etc.? That's a more difficult thing to do. But that's what the Kshatriya has to do. He has to somehow do that in such a way that it's not just artificial, the following, and when they're not looking, then they'll break the rules like that. So one answer, of course, is that behind all of this there has to be a higher taste. If we have a higher taste, we give up the lower taste. So if we have a higher taste, then we're less likely to indulge in the lower taste and break the rules to do it. So therefore, that's where the link comes with spiritual life. And that's why it's necessary that we have a king who's not just materially expert at controlling people, but also has that spiritual taste within him, which he can inspire in others, so that they can all understand that the goal of life is not simply to enjoy in the material world recklessly. And it's there to different degrees in different people. Ultimately, the Brahmanas should be more aware of it, but at least the Kshatriyas to some degree, because they have a mixture of sattva. So they understand, and they have a higher taste as well. So they rule is duty, and they do have a higher taste as well. If the higher taste isn't there, then the whole system is useless. So that's what Bhaktivinoda Thakur calls the asuric varnashram, where there is no recognition of God, there is no taste there at all. They're implementing the rules for material reasons only, and therefore it's artificial. When nobody's looking, you break the rules. That's what happens in the asuric varnashram system. So therefore, that system of rules has to be connected with spiritual life also. So that's why the king has to be a spiritual entity, and that's why the Pandavas were put on the throne, and that is why Parikshit was on the throne, because he had the proper combination to enforce the rules. At the same time, he set an example with his great devotion, and therefore the people were inspired to follow him, having a higher taste also. Okay, any question?
mentions that in the just beginning of the purport that the king has never been condemned, he can do no wrong, that he doesn't become sinful even after killing the Brahmana. But we also know that the king will accept 1/5 of the sinful reactions of the people, so it seems like perhaps it's not directly his fault, but he still shares in the sinful activity of the population.
Which means he has to suffer for that. Doesn't mean he becomes evil, but he has to suffer the results of it. So therefore, if he's responsible, he'll minimize the sins, so therefore he doesn't get any suffering. That's the idea behind that. Yeah.
And we have Srini who curse Archbishop. And sometimes you come across where you hear about these Christian or Muslims groups, and they say if you don't worship our God, you'll go to hell. So it's almost like a curse sort of thing. But they take it one step further. They say you go to hell forever. It's eternal damnation. Where that idea comes from, is it like an artificial thing that they've made up, or there's because they go eternally. I mean, hellish planets is in the material world, so that's not eternal anyway. So I'm just wondering, is it a concept that basically just made up to control the masses?
Well, I suppose we can say it's a theological concept in some Christian groups. I don't know whether it's in all of them, but definitely it's in some of them. So in other words, you follow this path. If you don't follow this path, then you're condemned. So the idea is we only have one life. If you don't become Christian, you end up in two places. One is limbo, which is kind of a weird place. That's like hell almost, and the other is the hellish one. If you do a lot of sinful activities, you end up in there. And if you're in limbo, I guess when the resurrection is our second coming, and then you may get mercy at that time to get out. Something like that. Something like that. So I think that's the Christian, the Catholic concept. I don't know if the Protestants, they may have a different concept. Maybe there's no limbo there. It's just heaven or hell. So if you accept Christ, then you go to heaven, and if you don't accept him, then you end up in the opposite. So that's their theology, so to speak. So it's limited to one lifetime also. But then the whole thing, of course, what is acceptance of Christ? What does that mean also? So you can say accept Christ, but then you can go out and do your sinful activities also. So that doesn't mean you would have to be very serious about that acceptance and follow all the directions of Christ as well.
Yeah, it just seems quite harsh, this idea. I mean, it might be a theological concept, but for one life you do the wrong thing, but you suffer forever.
Yes.
That the punishment doesn't really fit the crime.
Well, of course, if you don't believe in an afterlife, then you're intelligent. You would say, well, therefore I should accept it because I only got one life. That's the persuasive argument, I suppose, for that. If you don't want to accept another life, then you can say that. You can say that then you have to accept it because no other life. But if you don't accept that there's only one life, then that argument wouldn't work. But from the logical point of view, it would look a little bit irrational that everybody only gets one chance. It just seems a little strange from that point of view, and therefore we can say that logically speaking, God's more merciful and he gives you many chances. So that's a more merciful God.
Sri, or anybody like a Brahmana, when they utter a curse, is that the potency of the curse coming from them, or is it just Krishna fulfilling the Brahmana?
Well, it seems as a Brahmana they had developed powers by which their words came true. So therefore they can bless or they can curse like that. That was their power. So. Yeah.
Just on that, what the main article was making about these things in the Christian or whatever scriptures about, if you don't do this, you go to hell forever. I've heard it explained that the reason they have these kind of statements there is because of the level of consciousness of the people they're developing, so that they're dealing with, in order to impel them to follow the faith. They need to make statements like that rather than more refined statements.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that?
That's also there. And of course, there were some groups, early Christians, who believed in reincarnation. But then that got cut out at a certain point because they felt that if we do that, then the people will not take it too seriously.
The Nicene Creed removed that.
Huh?
The Nicene.
Yeah, something like that, yeah. About 500 years after Christ or something, they had a meeting and they decided they would cut that part out. It wasn't everybody believed it. There were groups, I think, in different places that had that belief. And then so those people do, they quote the Bible. That's, there's indications that so and so was so and so in a previous lifetime. They quote that as evidence that there was in the Old Testament itself evidence of going from body to body also. But then they kind of ignore that.
Just on a different point, I think it seems a bit irrational. I always try to understand how that Krishna, he comes once in the day of Brahma, that Srimad Bhagavatam, Krishna comes, and then, right afterwards, everything he did just falls apart. He established the Pandavas as the emperor, and then just the next generation over this happens, and then it's Kali Yuga, and then everything, the whole Kurukshetra, everything bring the establish the principles of religion.
And then it disappears again in Kali Yuga.
Just right afterwards, straight away, not any time after, right afterwards, right when he disappears, it just cuts into Kali Yuga. Do you think that Srimad Bhagavatam Krishna comes, that would last a little bit
longer?
Go into a Satya Yuga period for a long time, so we could all meditate. And Krishna was just here, but it just cuts out straight away. Seems a bit irrational.
Yeah. Well, because he is Srimad Bhagavatam, we would expect, that his influence lasts longer. But we see even with the other avatars, they're there, and then Nrsimhadev comes and he kills Hiranyakasipu, but then again they crop up again, and the demons crop up again, and the sons and grandsons again, and Bali comes up, he's demoniac in the beginning also, even as the grandson. So in spite of the fact that Nrsimhadev came, then again we have the demons coming up. So the Lord, of course, is so influential, but the other point is that the people in the material world are very materialistic. So the Lord shows himself. Those who are demonic in nature won't even recognize him, even Krishna. So when Krishna is there, Shishupala would not recognize Krishna as Supreme Lord. Duryodhana would not recognize him. He'd say he's an imposter. He's not the Supreme Lord, even if they could see him directly with their eyes. So therefore, even if the Supreme Lord appears, those who are very materialistic and demoniac, they don't get influenced at all. They stay like that. Yeah? When the problem becomes great and there's devatas are complaining, then the Lord comes and does something, as he did in the case of coming as Krishna and killing all the people affected. But again, the people crop up, the materialists crop up again, because it's majority materialists in the material world. So that's why the Lord keeps coming and coming all the time. Of course, he doesn't come every year. He comes every maybe 400,000 years or something, at least, or every million years or so as a Yuga avatar he will come. Because even if the Lord comes, then it degrades again. So he comes back again. It doesn't come all the time. So the compensation for that is, one, continuation of Manu's line to help keep the order when the Lord's not there. So that goes on for yugas and yugas and yugas, and all through the day of Brahma. And the other is the devotees of the Lord. So those are the two things that kind of counteract the materialistic tendencies. But otherwise, it's always going to be there. And even if the Lord comes, we get these huge forces coming up and battling with them. So we get all these different demons coming up, and then the Lord has to come and kill them. And it keeps happening all through the day of Brahma. The materialists don't learn their lesson.
Why is there so much importance placed on lineage and birth if it's all about...
What's that?
So much importance placed on lineage and birth of Purusha
yeah.
rather than qualities. The Kauravas are totally condemned. But
yeah.
There was one of the Kauravas who changed sides at the battle, and he was saintly?
There is some emphasis on birth, and we see that in the whole of Manu's line. You have to come in the line to claim kingship. But then the other thing is you do have to have the good qualities, and if you don't, then you can get killed, as in the case of King Vena. He came in Swayambhuva's line, but he wasn't proper, so the Brahmins cursed him and killed him. So you do have to have the qualities also, but it was expected that if you came in the line, at least you would have good qualities in general, but there are exceptional cases also. So I mentioned previously in relation to family lineages and caste, because the whole caste system came to be based upon birth. You're born in a Brahmana family, you're a Brahmana, and then you have Brahmana children, and they produce children, they're Brahmanas. So that's how it's come down in history. So I said there's a little bit of convenience there, because generally, if you have two parents of certain qualities, then their children will also have similar qualities. It's kind of in general, not always, but in general it's like that. And particularly if they're raised properly, then those qualities will come out. So that's a general principle. But then we have the black sheep coming out sometimes also, and the good parents give birth to a real crazy person, person who's not qualified. That also happens. So that was generally recognized that was the system. But then they would make exceptions. If someone of a different caste had different qualities, then he would change his varna also was there. So that was also there. So it was we could say the birth thing was a convenience, but then at a certain point it became more, stratified or strict, and they didn't look at the qualities, they just went by the birth. And then that also creates a problem, and then we have unqualified people doing the activities, and they create a big disturbance by doing that.
Regarding what you read about Prabhupada saying that the king is never at fault, that he never does anything wrong, even if he kills the Brahmana, I think.
Well, the ideal state. If he was a bad king, of course, then he's not going to...
So I'm just trying to understand, I don't mean to contradict or disagree with Srila Prabhupada, of course, but I'm just trying to understand from my point of view, because I read so many instances in which kings were doing something wrong, and one of the examples is King Vena, or even in the God Canto you read all these degraded and corrupted kings who were acting wrongly. So when Srila Prabhupada says that the king never acts wrongly, whatever he does,
it's not an absolute statement, obviously, because we see the exceptions to the rule. So if he is an ideal king, and he's coming in Manu's line, fine. Then we have to respect him, and if he does something it's wrong, then we could question it, but then probably there would be good reasons for it. So he mentions here, he may hang the culprit son of a Brahmana. Normally that's not done. The Brahmana, the king gives respect to the Brahmana. But in a certain case, a qualified king may have to take that action for a very particular purpose. And it may have to do it. But you can't condemn him because he had to do it for a certain purpose. But if he's unqualified, of course, then we can say fine. And therefore the Brahmanas cursed King Vena to die because he did everything wrong. He murdered people, he killed people, he did all sorts of crazy things. So they just said, just finish, and they condemned him. So it's not that all the kings are going to be like that, but if he is an ideal king, then we don't question his actions.
Okay, so I understand that, because the way I heard it is like whatever the king does, it doesn't matter, it's all right.
Yeah, then that any leader can do anything he wants in that case.
Okay, thank you. And then the other thing is, I still don't understand, because you mentioned how the kings that come in the line of Manu, but then we all come from Manu. So I was just wondering, is that different Manus? Like human beings come from Manu, Manusha, isn't it? Humans. We come from Manu. There's the Manus, and they have their offspring, etc. So this is the direct family line. Then we have offshoots from that also, who are not the direct family line. So then we have the king and his sons and his sons and his sons. So we see the case of Swayambhuva Manu, that his sons took over, and then Dhruva was in that line, and others, famous kings, were in that line. They came in a family line, a direct family line. Then we can say what's that? And that would be the king?
That's the king line, the son of the son of the son of the son, those lines,
And what about humans? Where are they coming from?
There's some other lines. I think they produce other children, and then those children gave birth to other different things, and then we get the trees coming out and all the other species coming out and everything like that.
But the main family line, father to son, the main line, that's where the dynasties come out, of the kingly dynasties.
Because I read in Bhagavatam that Swayam Brahman and Satarupa, they are the mother and father of humanity. So is that where the kings come from? Or?
Yeah. Because Dhruva came in that line. He was the grandson, I think. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Hare Krishna.
So it's fine.